So the mortal Thor is the current Thor story in Marvel Comics right now, and it's amazing, right? It does two things. The first is that Thor doesn't know who he is. He's operating under the name Sigurd Jarlson. The second thing is he doesn't have his powers. And so that's why when the story picks up and he meets with a girl named Kristen, who's basically his neighbor in the apartment building, he says things like, "My memory is not very good. I only remember three things about myself. The first is that my name is Sigurd Jarlson. The second is that I know I work with a hammer. And the third is that New York City is the best city in the world," which is true. That's why the New York Knicks are going to win the NBA Finals. And so in this conversation with Kristen, she asks him, like, how did you end up here? And he says, "A very kind person found me when I came to in an alleyway and handed me my apartment key and told me that my name was Sigurd Jarlson. They handed me my wallet that had my identity inside of it." Now, the cool thing about this, and we're just going to call him Sigurd just to make things easier in the story, as he and Kristen are making their way into this alley after leaving the apartment, they come across the exact same kid that found Sigurd in the alley, gave him his wallet, and then gave him the apartment key. Now, if your initial knee-jerk reaction is that, okay, this kid's probably Loki, you're 100% right. It is Loki, 100%. And he's very mysterious here. He doesn't really give any meaningful answers to Thor or Kristen, mostly because there aren't really any meaningful questions that are being asked here. But to validate your feeling that it is Loki, there's a couple things that go on. The first is that Kristen has met him before, but he was basically just a kid who challenged her to a $1 riddle, which is to say, if she got the riddle right, she got to keep her dollar. If she got it wrong, then Loki got her dollar. We don't really know what the riddle was, but he does the same thing, except this time it's a $5 riddle. And so when she accepts the deal, the riddle goes like this: "Worshipped am I from shore to shore. I formed the world. I make the law. To rulers, I'm the guiding star. Believe my truth, and you will go far. What am I?" And Kristen's initial answer is, "You're a god or a goddess." And Loki says, "No, I am a lie." So of course she loses the $5. The second thing that happens is that Sigurd talks about how he has to go find a job because the landlord keeps asking him for rent. And the job that he did found was a classified ad stapled to a telephone pole. And Kristen's just like, "That sounds shady as hell. You really should not accept that job. But if you're gonna do it, be very careful about what you're getting into, because things here in New York can get very sketchy very, very fast," which is absolutely true. And so that's where Loki looks to them and says, "I wish I could help you with the money side, but money is a human problem. As a card-carrying creature of myth and magic, I am beyond such things." Now, there isn't a whole lot of credit given to what Loki's saying as far as Kristen's concerned, because if you've ever spent any meaningful time in New York, you are going to come across people who tell you that they are creatures of myth and magic, because they're schizophrenics, right? So crazy people saying crazy things is not uncommon in New York, and you don't really pay attention to it. But when Sigurd gets to this job site, it turns out it's every bit as shady as he was warned about. There's a guy here named Mr. Hennessy. He's the guy in the black outfit. And what Sigurd and these other new construction workers have been hired on to do is to bust a strike. Not in the sense that they're going to attack the workers who are on strike, but in the sense that their job is to circumvent them. These existing workers on the construction site are striking for better pay and for better safety conditions on the job site. The idea behind hiring Sigurd is to say, okay, while these guys are on strike, you guys are going to go finish the job. And what he's hoping for is that a fight breaks out, because Mr. Hennessy brought his own henchmen. If a fight breaks out, then his henchmen can basically start cracking skulls of the striking workers, and that gives Hennessy legal authority to have them arrested and then have them fired. And so again, it's a very shady tactic, and I'm not even sure that it's legal, which is one of the questions that are asked by the guys who are here. Like, is this legal? It seems pretty sus. But of course, Sigurd turns down the job offer. And in fact, he goes so far as to say, how we treat others is how we are treated. Should others starve so that we can be fed, right? When our turn comes, what will we be told? That we are weak for wishing safety, fair money for fair work? Basically telling these other new construction workers, if Mr. Hennessy and his cronies will do it to those guys, they'll do it to us, right? So no, like, we should not take this job. And because of the fact that Sigurd is operating in this way and costing Mr. Hennessy workers from his perspective, he sends his henchmen after Sigurd. And let me tell you something, man, they thought he was just a regular guy, right? Just a regular construction worker. And like, when that happens, when they come rolling up on him, man, these guys get way more than they bargained for. Sigurd basically helps these guys understand their place in the bigger picture, because these henchmen roll up on him and they say, you shouldn't take these dangerous shortcuts down these narrow alleys, my friend. Something bad could happen to you. Now, the cool thing about these henchmen is that because Asgard is considered myth, they basically, quote unquote, worship and operate in the name of Thor. And from their perspective, Thor was a badass, and Thor was the kind of guy who didn't take lip off of anybody. And Thor would do exactly what they are doing, that Thor only values strength, and that anything other than how they define strength is basically a weakness. And so when the lightning strikes in the midst of this thunderstorm, one of the guys says, all your crap back there offended the gods, princess. Daddy Thor, he's giving us a sign, and he's angry. He wants to punish the unrighteous. And Sigurd just tells him, look, guys, you really don't want to do this right now. Like, I promise you, you don't want to do this. And they ultimately ignore him, right? They say, Thor is talking now. Thor has spoken, and we have to do what Thor says, man. He says, because Thor is a god, and you're just a man, just a weak, powerless little man. And Sigurd takes his hammer out of his bag and smashes the skull in on one of the guys, like right on the spot, literally cracks this guy's skull. And at that point, the other two guys are like, holy hell, right? Like Ed's skull is cracked wide open. And so the other two guys go to attack, and Sigurd starts taking these dudes apart piece by piece. He throws his hammer at the henchman with the sunglasses, hits him square in the face, breaking his sunglasses in half. So while he's laying on the ground, just crying like a newborn baby, the other guy goes after Sigurd. And Sigurd literally just starts cracking this guy's body apart, smashes him across the face, and just leaves him bleeding on the ground. And so the guy with the sunglasses stands up and is just like, who in the hell are you? And Sigurd just turns back and looks at him and says, did you not say that Thor was angry, that Thor wished to punish the unrighteous? If this is true, then tell your friends that Thor is coming, and sends him off as a message. And so following this, Loki finds Sigurd just walking down the street and grabs him and brings him back to the apartment of Kristen. And what's funny is that, like, when there's a knock on the door and like Sigurd's just standing there, and Kristen looks at Loki and it's just like, dude, is that a stab wound in this guy's head? What is this? Loki's just like, I don't know, man. Like, he was like that when I found him walking down the street. Have fun, and just like takes off running. He literally bails out. And so of course Sigurd ends up suturing up his own head. Now, this is where things get really cool, because while Asgard is cut off from Earth and all the Asgardian stuff is seemingly a myth, there's almost this kind of like subconscious desire in every single human across the world to accept the fact that Asgard is real. On a subconscious level, they know it's real, but they can't quite bring themselves to believe it consciously, right? The connection just isn't quite there. And so that's why when Sigurd picks up the tablet that Kristen was using to draw on, because she's an artist, that when he looks at it, he's just like, were you drawing me? And she's like, no, it looks like you, and there's actually an incredible resemblance here, but no, I was doing a mock-up for a Swedish black metal band, which is some of the darkest music you could ever imagine in your life, but the band wanted a whole art piece that was modeled after the myth of Thor. So again, subconsciously, it seems like she knows that Sigurd is Thor or recognizes him as Thor, but consciously, she doesn't quite put the pieces together yet. And so what's also really cool here is that Sigurd tells her what it was that he was doing, right? After the fight in the alley, he had grabbed the wallets of one of the guys, looked at his ID, and realized that he was part of a group that operates out of what's called the Rough House. So after suturing himself back together, which, truth to tell, Kristen is totally enamored by this. I mean, think about it, right? It's just great big, huge, muscular Norwegian man, probably the hottest man she's ever seen in her life, who's just suturing himself back together. I mean, it's pretty baller, right? I mean, no doubt. She's just kind of like, damn, like this guy, like, whew. Right, that once he's done all of that, he ends up going to the Rough House, right, and tracking these guys down. Now, this is the other cool thing, because again, while Sigurd doesn't know he's Thor, he's compelled to operate the way Thor would, specifically to operate against those individuals who would use the name of Thor in a disgraceful way, to bring harm to other people. But just like Kristen, Sigurd does not connect the dots in knowing that he is Thor. He's just just driven to act that way. And so when he shows up here, he beats the hell out of these guys. I mean, dude, he trashes these guys. As soon as he shows up, he's got a bungee cord tied to the hammer so he can basically yank the hammer back to himself. Like the guy with the sunglasses who took off as a message, he's the one who answers the door at the rough house. And as soon as this door opens, the first thing he sees is a hammer flying at his face. It's hilarious, right? Like literally after that, Sigur just starts crushing every single one of these guys. And the whole time he does it, he starts delivering a message, right? He says, you talk of killing my friends, taking all I have, because that's what they want to do, right? They don't want to kill him per se. Because of the fact that he attacked some of their own guys, they want to kill everybody around him. And he heard that conversation unfolding. And he says, I have not so many friends and not so much to take. If I ever had a life, I forgot what it was, but I remember what I know of the myths of Thor. The Thor that I know is not only a god of strength, he is not a god of talking and hurting. He is not your god. The Thor I know is a protector, and if he sees a thing that is wrong, he must break the sky to right it. And that's where one of the guys is like, I'll break your face, and he says, so, you want Thor? Then here he is, and just starts like going through, just ripping these guys to pieces. And so there aren't really many guys left, right? Only one of them is allowed to leave, just like before. And Sigurd tells him, he says, bury your dead, and change your life. All of you, change your lives, or I will come back and I will end them. And so what ends up happening is Mr. Hennessy, in hearing all of this, combined with the initial attack on his henchmen, ends up making a phone call to a guy that knows how to get things done, and he knows how to take out certain people. We end up finding out the guy he's talking to is Donald Blake. Now, here's the cool thing, and I'll answer this question here in a second because I know a lot of you guys are kind of like, what? So here's the thing, right? Donald Blake makes this kind of speech where he says, look into my eyes and I will tell you the secret of the gods. The gods have always been, whether humanity remembers them or not. The gods have always walked among us. Gods of thunder, gods of story, gods of knowledge, and of course, the god of lies, the soulless one, the serpent. And why have there always been gods? Why will there always be gods? For the mortals who need them. Because deep down, you all need an angry god, a ruthless king, a stern father, a strong hand for your neck to control your disordered lives. Deep down, you will always kneel. Am I lying? And it turns out that these henchmen that he's talking to say no. And so that's when he's met by another one of these henchmen who tells him, we've been hunting for this man for 2 weeks, the one that you've been trying to tell us to find. We believe we've found him, but there are 4 people that match this description, a gigantic blonde guy, and they start running off the names, right? Kaminsky and different people like that. But one of the names is Sigurd, and that's where Donald Blake stops him and says, Sigurd Jarlsson, that's the man we're hunting for. Now, the next thing that happens here is that Sigurd Jarlsson is laying in bed, and as he starts to drift off to sleep, trying to figure out who he is and what compels him to act the way he does, he has this vision of Thor, and Thor says, I am dead, Sigurd Jarlsson, I am dead, and you are not me. You have nothing of mine. It is winter now, and all I was is buried under the snow. All but one thing. There is wrong, Sigurd, and where there is wrong, you break the sky to right it. For that is who you are. That is who we are. And in the face of this, Sigurd wakes up and initially dismisses it as a nightmare. But that's the question. What's real and what's not? What's going on here? Okay, so all of this goes back to the story of Donald Blake and what happened with Thor in Immortal Thor issue number 25. The story of Donald Blake is fairly simple. A lot of you guys know that Donald Blake was the human persona of Thor, that when Odin first cast Thor down to Earth to teach him humility, that he turned him into Donald Blake. And until such a time as Thor demonstrated humility, he wouldn't be able to be anything other than Blake. And so Donald Blake discovers a stick in a cave, he grabs a stick, he hits it on the ground, turns into Thor, and then basically starts becoming a superhero, but he kind of switched back between Thor and Donald Blake. And for a time, if he lost his hammer for, I think it was 60 seconds, he would automatically shift into Blake. But it was a dual identity thing, right? When Thor didn't need to be a superhero, he would be Donald Blake. Whenever Thor was needed, Donald Blake would turn into Thor. What was really cool about this is there came a point in Marvel where Thor just never turned back into Blake. He was just Thor 24 hours a day in every single story. Well, Marvel leaned into that. And what they revealed was that whenever Donald Blake turns into Thor, Donald Blake himself goes into what's essentially a dreamscape. But because Thor hadn't shifted back into Blake for years and years and years, it would be like if I tossed you in solitary confinement for 30 years. You would go crazy. And that's what happened with Donald Blake. He went insane in the dreamscape. And so when there came a moment where Thor shifted back into Blake, Blake went on a warpath and literally started attacking any and everybody he could. But because he wouldn't shift back into Thor, Thor was trapped in the dreamscape. And so his spirit ends up escaping, donning the destroyer armor, and then by the time you get to the end of the conflict, Donald Blake is defeated, and then he's chained down below Asgard with a serpent dripping poison or acid into his eyes, and is supposed to be that way for all eternity. But that's where the story of Loki picked up. A lot of you guys know that Loki has always been the god of lies, right? In the sense that he'd be just as inclined to trick you and lie to you as he would be to tell you the truth. Well, there comes a point where Loki gets tired of playing this role. He wants to be something else other than the god of lies. And so he starts attaining these incredible levels of power over the course of years of storytelling in Marvel and becomes the god of stories. The way it was originally pitched was that Loki had this whole new level of power that seemingly made him rival the one above all, in the sense that he could just like alter reality on a whim and make anything happen. Instead, he never really did that. His role as the god of stories was more manipulating people down certain paths and making sure that their story unfolded in a way that Loki wanted it to. So basically, if the one above all was acting indirectly, is really what it was. And so all these plot threads came to a head in Immortal Thor number 25, that where Thor dies at the end of the story, a final confrontation happens between himself and Donald Blake. While Thor is in the afterlife, essentially, he takes the soul of Donald Blake, and then Donald Blake ended up somehow escaping, and that's how Blake ends up here. But that's why he refers to himself as soulless, because Thor took his soul. For Loki, he actually stabbed Thor in the back and killed him. And so that fed into the destruction of the Bifrost Bridge. And that's how you end up with everybody forgetting that Asgardians exist. That's why we are where we are in this story. Because where Donald Blake sends his forces after Sigurd at this new construction site job that he has, and he pummels a whole bunch of them, sends them flying off, the construction site and all that kind of stuff, and basically shows that he can take each and every one of them out, that the cops show up. And so the cops arrest Sigurd, which of course leads to him calling Kristen, and she says, "Hold tight, I'm sending a lawyer over there." And while Loki's listening to this phone call with Kristen, a voice comes out of nowhere. And when Loki says, "That's not good," this voice says, "No, it's not." And it says, "If you wanted to remain hidden, you should not have used your magic on those mortal papers, Loki. That required knowledge. Knowledge I do not have, and knowledge I do not have I seek out." Because the papers he's talking about are basically documents, right? Showing Thor's work history and all that kind of stuff when he went to apply for the construction job. But it turns out the person who's talking is Odin. And he says, "So satisfy my curiosity, Skald. Tell your father Odin what exactly you are up to this time, and pray I enjoy the tale." And so when the two of them sit down and actually have a cup of coffee, which is kind of cool, Loki asks Odin the question, "How did you escape Valhalla?" Because Odin has been dead in Marvel Comics for quite some time, technically since 2022. Right, is when his character died. And Odin just asked him, "Escape," right? "I am Odin One Eye. I built Valhalla. Each stone I laid with my own hand as the wind of death howled about me. How did I escape, Loki? I walked out." And he says, "Yet there was a price for it. What I have walked away from, I cannot walk back to. Valhalla is now closed to me for all time, nor can I return to the life I left. I was born to seek knowledge and make it mine, yet I wasted millennia on a throne, lost in games of ego and power. No more. Odin Allfather is gone, and no loss. Odin the Wanderer will remain. And the response of Loki, so you say, right? We'll see what happens. Now, that's kind of the little bit of Loki as the god of stories. It is the little one above all element, but he's almost also kind of a stand-in for like us as the reader or like Marvel editors and writers. When he says, so you say, it's making reference to the idea that like, this is a retcon that's not going to last. And Odin will go back to being the All-Father of Asgard at some point in time. But Odin just dismisses it and says sarcasm, right? Luck cannot be trusted because luck cannot be controlled. And you are afraid of what you cannot control. So you try to control all you can. In this, you do not change. And so you made a sacrifice of my son. And Loki just tells him, no, right? It's not about control. I have to be free, and I am not free unless everybody is free. I am fighting to save everything. Would you go back to what you were, stunted and caged, frozen in an old idea of yourself like a block of ice? I would prefer death to that. So would you, and so would Thor. Trust me. And so the response of Odin, I will have to. Thor is dead, and now we have this Sigurd Jarlsson, this mortal who is not my son, who has the blood of other mortals on his hands, and may now answer for that. It is messy work, Loki, a trick coming apart even as you pull it from your sleeve, spiraling far out of your control. And the question Loki asks is, and whose fault is that? Old man, Sigurd was attacked by assassins, the henchmen of Donald Blake. They cornered him on the high steel, and up there, it was him or them, though the police may not see it that way. And he says, but who sent the assassins? Who is the father serpent? You say that you are a seeker of knowledge. In your life, Odin, have you that knowledge? Because I do. The serpent has a name, Donald Blake, who was your creation. And the response of Odin, liar you are, Loki, even in this aspect, a lie of omission, the most craven lie of all. I made Donald Blake to remind Thor of humanity, not to be a god himself. That was a mischief that you forced upon him to work your magic and to escape your own burdens. If he makes trouble for you now or for Jarlsson, it is your own hand behind it. And so again, all this feeds in to what we've talked about, the actions of Loki, Donald Blake being stuck in the dreamscape and going insane. And so Loki says, I didn't know that Blake had gotten loose. I didn't know he was here. What I've begun, you are right, is too complex a working and too messy. I can't get Sigurd out of this. I can push here and there. I can ease the way, but too much would unbalance everything. Even the papers that I have made for him so he could get work, the certificates, they are not perfect if the police look too closely. And so he asks, can you help, right? Can you free him? And the response of Odin, if men place bonds on my limbs, I can sing that I can walk. The fetter starts from my feet and the manacle from my hands. And so Loki's just like, I don't know what that means. Will you help him or not? Right? Because he was defending himself. That's all he was doing. But Odin looks at this, and here's a funny thing. If Thor is currently dead and in the afterworld, then Sigurd is not truly Thor. He's a kind of manifestation of Thor, maybe all the goodness of Thor, but it's not as though it's a Donald Blake and Thor persona. He's a wholly different being and a wholly different person. It's not like it was back in the day when Odin took the ability for Thor to turn into Donald Blake and gave it to Beta Ray Bill. And so Thor just started calling himself Sigurd Jarlsson when he was operating on Earth as a construction worker. This is not the same as that, right? Sigurd is a wholly different person. And so that's why Odin says, yes, he fought. He was defending himself when the fight came to him. And with the means and the power he had, he struck hard and he struck well. I would expect no less of one who is the seed of great things, even a mortal man. But then he sought a new fight. He sought vengeance for slights committed in the name of Thor, not slights committed against him, because Sigurd and Thor are not the same person. It was my son's name taken in vain that drove him to violence. That is not what my son would have wished. Thor would have just dismissed it. He would have ignored guys like this, not worth his time. And so Loki says, I doubt Thor would wish for Sigurd's friends or neighbors to be murdered. And Odin's response, if an innocent is threatened, that is a cause to battle. But cheap talk, people running their mouth with nothing to back it up, the words of fools in their cups, here is my verdict. That battle was not upon Jarlson until he wished for it. He may become what he must become, but he is not Thor. He fought for selfish reasons. Thor fights for other people. And so ultimately Odin says, he has not learned humility. Mend your broken trick, Loki. I will be watching. And if I must, I will intervene. And so this is a huge revelation here, right? It's one thing for us to see Sigurd and to see him operating in the name of Thor, to see that he is functioning with amnesia and to think that maybe he's just Thor reborn and not really knowing who he is. But this changes everything, right? Sigurd is his own being, his own entity walking on Earth. Thor is over there. And the fact that Odin looks at Thor in the afterlife and says, my son is dead, and whoever this person is that's operating out there as the name Sigurd, number one, he is not my son, and number two, even if he lies to himself and says he's operating in the name of my son, he's not. He's a man operating for selfish reasons. What this really seems to be pointing towards here is that Marvel is either going to merge Thor and Sigurd into one person, or Sigurd is going to continue on as his own being even when Thor returns. So it's really cool, right, to see how Marvel's doing this. You see why this story is so incredibly popular among Thor readers right now. It's a very different take from what we've historically seen. And so at that point, when we switch over to Sigurd, it's just the good cop, bad cop routine, right? That's really all it is, right? The cop of the blue shirt, this guy's name is Lo, and he talks to Sigurd and he says, you know what the duty to retreat is, right? It's a legal principle that operates in New York State. Other states have stand your ground laws. We have this. And that's where the other cop says, you're not entitled to use deadly force on someone who wants to use it on you. And Lo says, if you can safely retreat from the situation, big if, in your case, right? Hard to run away when you're on a girder 300 feet in the air. Plus, we had a look at the guns those snake people carried. They fired two types of ammo. Type 1 is a sleep drug. All the folks the snake guys hit with that, they'll be fine. Even the ones up on the girder with you, their harnesses caught them, so just a few bumps and bruises. But ammo type 2, you don't wake up from. So that's the deadly force covered. You or them. You did what you had to do. That's your story, right? So again, good cop, bad cop. They're trying to get him to confess is really what it is. And cops do this. Cops are legally allowed to lie to you and trick you in order to force a confession out of you. And that's why Sigurd takes the smart move. Is my lawyer here yet, right? But again, Lo chimes in. I mean, he hasn't made it, but you don't really want a lawyer for this kind of thing, right? I mean, it makes life harder. You know, it makes it hard for us to help you out, man. You really don't want that. And the other cop is just like, why would you want to help out a piece of trash like this, Lo? It's clear he was in on it, right? And Lo's just like, no, man. Let him tell his side of the story, right? Let him clear all this up for us, you know? So, I mean, if you're going to give us a silent treatment, does that mean that you don't really want us to help you? Well, then fine, right? You know, I'll be right back. And that's when he leaves Sigurd with the other cop, right? The cop in the green outfit. And he says, it's just you and me for a little while, right? A lump hammer. That's unusual for a man in your profession. And he starts running over all these things that Sigurd has. You don't really see a hammer used very often as a sign of murder, and certainly not attempted murder. He says, but it's a funny thing. There was a hammer attack in a Long Island city not too long ago. A couple of bikers got their heads smashed in. It really fits the MO when it comes to you. They described what he looked like. They described his accent, Scandinavian. And so when Lo finally comes back in, Sigurd just says, I want my lawyer, right? And he says, like, we want to help you here, Sigurd. That other stuff, right? That's not really our case. Right? I mean, your story's pretty simple, right? Snake Eyes cornered you, you couldn't get away, you met your duty to retreat as best you could, I defended myself. Just say it, man, and you walk, guaranteed. And he says, this is America, man. The cops are not allowed to lie to you. And that's when a lawyer shows up here. And it's like, really? The cops aren't allowed. When did that change? When did that become a thing here in the United States that the cops can't lie? And so this guy presents a document that's signed by the commissioner that basically says Sigurd can go free. Sigurd can walk. And it's a crazy thing, right? Because these cops are pissed. They're like, wait a minute. No way the commissioner signed off on this guy walking free. And that's where the lawyer's just like, hey man, if you want to verify that, then be my guest, right? The commissioner is not in the best mood in the here and now though. So, pay your money, take your chances if you choose to go see him. And so that ultimately means that Sigurd goes free. But when he gets out here, he meets up with Kristen. And it turns out that that's not the lawyer that Kristen sent. That lawyer was sent by somebody else. Kristen's lawyer is actually a copyright lawyer, right? This guy would really have no idea what he's doing. And truth to tell, it would ultimately end up in Sigurd in a worse place than he was before all this started. But he ultimately ends up leaving with this lawyer. He gets into a limousine only to be met with Donald Blake. And Donald Blake just says, I am so very glad that you are not dead. And when the lawyer leaves, Blake just says, I wanted a chance to look you in the eye. They are, after all, the windows to the soul. When you look in my eyes, what do you see? And the response of Sigurd, I see emptiness. And so that's where Blake just says, a perceptive man. I had to test you to understand. If those idiots had killed you, you wouldn't be who I think you are. Your name would only be an echo, a synchronicity, the universe's rhyme etched on a tombstone. And you are more than that, aren't you? You're special. And the response of Sigurd, no, right? I am nobody important, no one special. I am just a man, nothing more than that. And Blake just tells him, just a man with a hammer. Seems kind of fishy, a little weird, right? You only have what everyone has, everyone but me. And that's the trick, isn't it? Because if you can get there from here, then that means something. And so that's where Sigurd asks him, like, who the hell are you? And Blake just says, my name is Donald Blake. Right? I forget exactly when I stopped being Donald, so just call me Blake. Was it when I took vengeance on the Golden Realm, or when I was chained deep in the dark and the venom ate my eyes, when I set myself free and came here, long before the bridge to this world broke asunder, when I lost the one thing that I had left, right? Referencing when Thor took his soul. But Sigurd doesn't know anything about this, and that's where Blake tells him, I am the god of lies. Right? First and foremost, I speak with a forked tongue, but the truth is, there is something you have, Sigurd Jarlson, something that I want. And Sigurd asks him, what is it that I have that you want? An apartment that I will lose very soon? A mattress, a TV set, a hot plate that's broken, some clothes, a hammer I bought from a thrift store. And that's where Blake just tells him, no, it's nothing physical, something much more precious, and literally fires off this substance into Sigurd's face and says, but I don't believe it will fit in this container anymore, not unless we crush it down very small. I am so very glad that you are not dead, Sigurd. Death would have been so much easier. So effectively, it looks like he's taking his soul. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Again, it's Al Ewing, very metatextual and very wonky, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.